Scott Peterson's defense team convinced the California Supreme Court that he was wronged by the jury, and he's been taken off of San Quentin's death row. He's now hoping a judge will grant him a new trial and reverse his murder conviction for killing his wife, Lacey, and their unborn child, Connor. Welcome to Profiling Evil in this Court TV segment on Scott Peterson's resentencing. Please take just a moment, hit that like and subscribe button. Now let's jump into tonight's discussion with Vinnie Politan. I'm joined by my colleague, retired FBI agent Bobby Chacon.
I'm Vinnie Politan. Thanks so much for joining us. Great to have you aboard tonight here on Closing Arguments. And it's turning out that this week, unfortunately, is ending up as a good week to be a convicted murderer. Okay? Good week to be a convicted murderer. Let's begin with what happened in Missouri today. Lindley Rennick, as you know, facing first-degree murder charges for masterminding the murder of her husband, Ben, who was shot 8 times. She was there at the snake farm. Here's today's verdict.
Okay, this is verdict. As to count 1, we, the jury, find the defendant, Lindley Rennick, guilty of murder in the 2nd degree as submitted in instruction number 9, and that's signed by your foreperson. And verdict as to count 2, we, the jury, find the defendant, Lindley Rennick, guilty of armed criminal action as submitted in number 16, and that's signed by your foreperson. Are these your verdicts, and so say each of you? Okay. Either side want this jury polled?
Okay, and in Missouri, the jury gives a sentencing recommendation. So it wasn't first degree, which was life, right? Life without parole. She was done, gone forever, right? Dies in prison for murdering her husband, the father of one of her children. Instead, it was 2nd degree. So now the jury all of a sudden had some a range, 10 to 30 years. Whoosh, 13 years. And then another 3 for using the use of the weapon. But at the end of the day, you calculate everything. She gets out in her early 40s. After murdering her husband, she'll be out in her early 40s. Okay? That's story number 1. Good day for a murderer, right? When you get out in like 11 years. Now, Scott Peterson, we're going way back. Scott Peterson was convicted of double murder years ago, but he was back in court. Kind of almost looks the same. Hair's getting a little salt and peppery there, Scott Peterson. But he was resentenced. If you'll recall, that trial that I covered years ago, right here on Court TV, Scott Peterson was convicted of murdering Lacey and his unborn son, Connor, and then sentenced to death by the jury. Well, the death penalty sentence was overturned, and he was resentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Another victory for another convicted murderer. This one, not only killing his wife, but not even giving little Connor a chance at life. Unbelievable. But I want to talk more about this because this whole Scott Peterson situation could get much more complicated because there's a hearing coming up in February where they're attempting to get a new trial based upon several issues, including juror misconduct and other issues. If, in fact, they get a new trial, there is a whole theory that they have, that it sort of existed back at the time. I remember hearing about it when I was in Modesto, when all this happened. But now they want to present the case in front of the jury much differently. And if they win with the motions that they're making and are able to uncover some evidence at this hearing in February that then overturns the conviction and sends the thing back to trial, we could have a very different trial of Scott Peterson the second time around. And that's because of a new defense theory. They're calling it newly uncovered evidence, but I'm telling you, what I'm hearing sounded very familiar. I think it was just evidence that wasn't presented in court at the time. But I want you to listen to Cliff Gardner. This is Scott Peterson's defense attorney, current defense attorney. Take a listen.
There's no scratches, there's no fiber evidence, there's no DNA, there's no blood evidence, there's no murder weapon, there's nothing. There's nothing that ties Scott to this crime. I've never seen a case where the prosecutor couldn't prove how it happened, where it happened, or when it happened.
Okay, and that was consistent with the way things were at the original trial, but Janie Peterson, who is Scott's sister-in-law, has sort of been the family spokesperson through the years and has been talking a lot for years now about newly uncovered evidence, a new theory, and it all focuses around some burglaries that were taking place in the neighborhood around the time that Laci was killed, disappeared, however you want to say it. Take a listen. This is, again, Janie Peterson, Scott Peterson's sister-in-law.
You know, this habeas petition was filed 5 years ago, and it outlined new evidence in the case. It outlined, or I should say, evidence that wasn't presented in court. Not all of it was new evidence from that perspective, but Scott's habeas petition outlined evidence that wasn't heard in court. It outlined that Laci was alive and walking the dog the morning that she went missing. This took place after Scott left for the day. If Laci's walking the dog, Scott is innocent. It outlined information from the mailman that corroborates that Laci was walking the dog. It further goes on to talk about the evidence that's been collected that Laci confronted or encountered the burglars across the street. There was a burglary that occurred across the street the day that Laci went missing. And, you know, we've been investigating this entire time. So we have 5 more years of information. So we're looking forward to our day in court so the public can hear that Scott is innocent. And we need justice for Laci and Connor and Scott.
All right, it's been 19 years, but what goes into now, let's say, worst case scenario, right, for prosecutors, and I think for justice, I saw the trial, he gets a new trial. If something was done that was improper, he should get a new trial, okay? But at the end of the day, it's going to be a challenge 19 years later. Let me bring in tonight's guest. Joining me in Los Angeles, California, retired FBI Special Agent Bobby Chacon, and in Salt Lake City, Utah, retired police commander and host of the Profiling Evil podcast, Mike King. Great to see you both. Let's start with the prosecutors can't say how, when, where the crime occurred. And to me, when I look back on the Scott Peterson case, the biggest piece of evidence was Scott Peterson's alibi. Because when Laci is missing, his alibi is, couldn't have been me. I was at San Francisco Bay fishing, which is nowhere near Modesto. As a matter of fact, there's 8 bodies of water, I believe, between Modesto and San Francisco Bay. And it's Christmas Eve morning, right? He's fishing. And then all of a sudden, that's where the bodies are recovered of Laci and Connor. So, Bobby, tell me what you think of the prospect that it's either coincidental that he happened to be fishing where they happened to dump the bodies, these so-called other people, or was someone trying to frame the manure salesman from Modesto? That's what he did for a living, by the way.
Yeah, well, first of all, as a lawyer, I hope that they don't prevail and get a new trial. As you just heard his sister say, she backed off from saying new evidence, because sometimes new evidence can justify a trial. This was simply evidence that his defense attorney chose not to bring up a trial, chose not to introduce a trial. That's a strategy. You don't get a new trial for a strategy, for a wrong strategy. You rolled the dice and you lost for whatever reason. If they didn't want to introduce that evidence, I don't know. But I do hope the court upholds the original conviction. As far as the evidence in the case, and I was involved personally in this case, from a recovery standpoint, I took my FBI dive team out to Richmond Bay or San Francisco Bay.
Wait, Bobby, can I just say this? You're like the Forrest Gump of investigators. Every case we're talking about, you've got a piece of. Go ahead, continue. I'm sorry.
Sure. Modesto called us and said, can you bring your dive team out? And I did. I brought my dive team out. We spent almost a month in San Francisco Bay searching after Laci and Connor had been found, because there were parts of Laci that hadn't been recovered at the site. And there was evidence in the storage facility that Scott had rented that he could have fashioned weights in ceramic pots You put concrete in there. Then you chip away the ceramic pot. The broken pots were in the storage facility, as was, I think, a half-empty bag of concrete. We felt that the forensic examination of the body, of Lacey's body, looked like she probably was weighted down under that water. Remember, she was in the water for almost 4 months. And so something kept her down, something weighted her down. And we think those were the weights that he had fashioned. And so we were down there looking for those weights and some of maybe pieces, maybe parts that were still attached to those anchors. The theory that she happened upon a burglary. There's no way burglars, would happen upon someone and then drive her all the way from Modesto to San Francisco Bay and then take the time to weight her body down underwater. Burglars don't do that. Even if they happen upon somebody and kill them in the course of a burglary, they don't take those measures to hide the body. I mean, if they have no connection, they're gonna leave the body in place, or they're gonna hide it somewhere close and then get the hell out of there. It's not conceivable that a random burglar or even a random burglary crew would happen upon Lacey and then kill her and then transport her that far and then put her under the water. It strains credibility to me to even make that assertion.
Yeah, Mike, that was the problem I always had with all this. And I mean, the alternative argument is that they held her hostage and then waited to hear what Scott Peterson's alibi was. Then it was time to pounce and frame him for the murder. It's absurd. And during all these searches, by the way, I think they followed Scott Peterson. He was like looking out over at San Francisco Bay in between the time that she went missing and before she was found. He was making trips there. And then there was this one other great piece of evidence where there were reports that they had found something in San Francisco Bay and someone had left a message on his machine, but they tapped his phone, so they have him listening to the recording, and in the recording they say that they found like an old anchor or something, and you hear him literally say, whoosh, like, whew, thank goodness. It was unreal.
Amazing.
Yeah, so what are your thoughts about a burglar or a kidnapper or someone framing Scott Peterson? And it's not just a coincidence that she's there, but they're actually trying to frame the manure salesman for the murder.
I think this is the funniest thing about having old cops on this channel helping out and answering these questions, that Bobby was out there on the scene. We've seen so many homicide cases and so many investigations and heard so many alibis, but this thing is no different than it was 19 or 20 years ago. This is a circumstantial case. Thankfully, Connor and Lacey were found, but this thing boils down to circumstantial evidence, and I do not believe for a moment that two bungling burglars would take a person and hold them hostage for a number of days, waiting to hear whether a believed or not believed husband might come up with some kind of an alibi, and then drive past 8 lakes to get rid of this body and dispose of it in the exact same place that this guy is fishing. When these guys lose control and a crime scene becomes uncontrolled and disorganized, like this would have been if they stumbled across Lacey in the middle of a burglary, they're going to be trying to wash their hands and get rid of this thing as quick as they can.
And I'm not 100% sure about the timing of the burglary. My recollection, and again, I could be wrong here, was that the burglaries actually happened a little bit before she went missing. It happened that week, but not that day. But let me just read a little bit from the habeas petition, because there's one more issue we've got to deal with here right now. To prove the defense theory that Lacey was alive when Scott left home to go fishing, counsel promised the jury it would hear from several witnesses who saw Lacey in Modesto after Scott left. According to counsel, this evidence would prove that Scott was, quote, stone cold innocent. That's Mark Garagos' quote right there. I remember him saying that. Counsel failed to introduce evidence that would have corroborated the testimony of the neighbors who saw Lacey walking her dog. This evidence included statements from Stephen Todd, the man who was burglarizing the house directly across the street from the Petersons at the very time Lacey disappeared after Scott had left to go fishing, and who told acquaintances that Lacey confronted him and he verbally threatened her. If indeed Lacey confronted Todd, then Scott is innocent, since he was well on his way to Berkeley at the time. Next one. On December 27th, Gray Bill, I think he's a mailman, told police that Mackenzie did not bark at him on Christmas Eve. Moreover, Mackenzie's her dog. Graybill told police that the Peterson's gate was open when he showed up between 10:35 and 10:50 a.m. on Christmas Eve. This was some 15 to 30 minutes after service had to put the dog back into the yard and closed the gate, indicating Lacey had gone on her walk after service put the dog away. So the dog didn't bark on Christmas Eve. New trial. Mike, what are your thoughts about this this part? The part where the dog is found and then is put back in there, and how it all relates to the timeline.
Yeah, as much as we like to have eyewitness accounts, we also look at eyewitness accounts with a whole lot of question, because people are confused by their own circumstances, the environment, maybe their personal biases and prejudices, and folks can forget or not really make a great timestamp of when things happen. Now, a mail carrier day after day showing up at the same time, that becomes a little more credible, and you think, okay, I can live with that. But somebody saying I saw her walking or I saw her down the street, it would be really easy to get those dates and times confirmed. That's why we like to have forensic evidence to back up a credit card or a CCTV camera or something like that. Again, eyewitness accounts, as much as we like them, are something that needs to be suspect.
All right, Bobby, I'll give you the final word on this. When it comes to, witnesses say, yeah, I thought I saw her walking the dog, or the mail carrier. Yeah, I didn't hear the bark on Christmas Eve.
Yeah, I think Mike's right. I think I'll tell you a project I worked on with the California Innocence Project a couple years ago, and they determined that 85% of wrongful convictions in the state of California were the result of faulty eyewitness identification. So Mike's right. Eyewitness identification and recall and memory, all of that stuff, is subject to really a lot of testing. You have to pull on it. You have to test it. And regardless of that, this doesn't sound like anything new. This was available to his attorneys originally. All of these statements, you don't get 20 years to keep mulling things over and find new people to say new things. That's just not the way the law works. You just don't have that right. So, I like I said, I truly hope the petition is denied and that he doesn't get a trial. If there's new evidence or if there's a mistake at trial, that's one thing. But to sit around and say, you know what, we think we've come up with a different theory and we have these new people willing to say different things, I just don't see that as credible.
Absolutely. And the work of the Innocence Project is amazing, because there's the worst part of our system is a wrongful conviction. But coming in a close second is a wrongful exoneration, which is what some of this faulty witness testimony could lead to. But all right, Bobby and Mike are going to stay with us.
Well, how do you feel about Scott Peterson having his death sentence commuted, folks? The life without parole sentence was more of a formality, and now the court's going to have to decide whether Peterson gets a brand new trial. What do you think is going to happen in February? I'm going to be looking for your answers below. Thanks for weighing in on this one. But you know what's really troubling me? With all the comments yesterday about Scott Peterson not being treated fairly in the criminal justice system, I didn't hear one person, not once, mention how sad it is that Lacey Peterson and her son Connor were murdered. If it wasn't Scott, shouldn't the defense be wondering who? It's really interesting to think that Connor would actually be 18 years old now. This is tragic, isn't it? Well, thanks for supporting Profiling Evil. You can find us on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And please take a moment and hit that like and the subscribe button. That way we'll see you on the next crime scene.